Mr. Gottfried, I want to revisit actually want to visit serious condition for a moment. I heard you explain it. I heard you say words have meaning, which is great to hear because we debated a couple words a couple weeks ago that were difficult to explain. So let's talk about serious condition. Would you define back pain as a serious condition?
It is conceivable that a given individual's back pain could be so severe that a physician in reasonable professional judgment could say that that patient's back pain was a serious debilitating condition.
So that's a yes.
But ordinarily, I would think not.
Okay. Migraines, same thing?
Again, it is conceivable that
another yes.
could be correct.
Yes or no is good. That's fine.
Well,
I know it's all
excuse
conceivable,
me,
but
I'll answer your question.
Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Godfrey can answer the question how he chooses to answer the question.
Yes, he can, but he cannot.
He's trying to answer your question.
Okay,
Please allow him the time to answer your question.
That's fine, but it's a nice tactic that he goes on a filibuster every time a question is asked.
Then don't ask him those questions.
Okay, let's move on then. So in a yes or no answer, can you define that? Can you define, would you say that, I don't know, foot pain could be a serious condition? Yes or no?
Same answer.
Same answer. Great. Okay. So therefore, it really goes beyond what many people have talked about with palliative pain and care and everything else. Public place, I want to talk about that for a second. Public place is defined as a motor vehicle and then an aircraft, which is interesting, as defined in Section 240 of the General Business Law. And I guess you could get into a problem there because airplanes usually travel across state lines. Not always. Sometimes they go Albany to Buffalo, but very often they go out of state lines. So wouldn't the person obviously be in violation of federal law at that point? If they're on an aircraft with marijuana, medically prescribed or not, which violates federal law.
As I understand in the bill, the use of the term public place is in the context of prohibiting the consumption or display in public places. So the fact that airplanes fly, that doesn't loosen the bill. If anything, that perhaps makes the bill more restrictive. But yes, if you are carrying marijuana in interstate commerce or not, you are violating federal law.
Right.
Yes.
But so they wouldn't be violating this law, but they would be violating federal law by probably they wouldn't get it through security anyway if the TSA is doing their jobs, and generally they do pretty well at grabbing this stuff. So the person would therefore be placed under arrest for trying to transport marijuana onto an airplane to begin with, which I find kind of an interesting little twist in this. But, I mean, they would. They try to get through security with marijuana. Whether it's medically prescribed or not, they're going to jail.
I would imagine that if TSA agents discovered some quantity of marijuana on your person, you'd be in big trouble with federal law. That's correct.
Okay.
This bill doesn't change that. I wish we could.
Okay. The other thing that struck me was just give me 1 second here, the registered organizations. And you talked, I agree with my colleague that talked about maybe getting this directly to the pharmacies, and I know it does address that, which is good. But it also talks about a facility license under Article 28 of this chapter, and I know you discussed a little bit about that. And then a not-for-profit corporation organized for the purposes of acquiring, possessing, manufacturing, selling, delivering, transporting, or distributing marijuana for certified medical use. Given the history of some of our not-for-profits in the state, I can see some problems arising there. But
if that's a question, I'll answer it. If not,
yeah, I just want to flesh that out a little bit.
Okay.
How do you foresee
the bill,
this?
First of all, those entities would be under the same regulations that a pharmacy or a hospital would be under, number one. And number two, the health department would only be authorized to register that kind of organization if they make a finding that there are no registered organizations that are hospitals or pharmacies serving that area. I would be surprised if any such organizations are ever registered under this law, but that was put in just as a backstop because there might be a part of the state where no hospital or pharmacy would choose to be a registered organization.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, in California and Colorado, where they seem to have had some big problems, maybe they're approached in a different way because they seem to have a lot more dispensaries that are not pharmacies.
The California law bears virtually no resemblance to this bill, and for very good reason. Any problem that may or may not exist in California, I don't think there is any basis for thinking that that problem would exist under this law. They bear no resemblance to one another.
Okay. On page 11 of the bill, line 37, it begins to talk about a school, employer, or landlord may not discriminate, and they may not refuse to enroll or employ or lease to or otherwise penalize a person solely for that person's status as a certified patient or designated caregiver, unless failing to do so would put the school, employer, landlord in violation of federal law or cause it to lose a federal contract or funding. So are we saying then that you could have a teacher, let's say, that has been prescribed marijuana for migraines, back pain, whatever it was, and is there an affirmative defense for that person if they're using marijuana as they try to get through the day because they're a registered user? Is there an affirmative defense for them?
If what they are being fired for is being stoned on the job, or for making non-medical use of marijuana, or if they're being fired for is because of a finding that their use of this drug, like any other drug, was impairing their performance, then this bill would not protect them.
The bill would not protect them. Okay.
Correct. The only thing the bill protects them from is being fired solely for their status as being a certified patient, again, unless federal law would require them to be fired.
But what if they needed that marijuana? And you know what, sadly, I don't know that the person is using marijuana, but there's a school principal within my district that has very serious cancer, and she's working through the day. And God bless her, she's doing her best. And, would she be allowed under this legislation, if it relieved her pain and her nausea, because this is a person that, this would be a good use of this bill, would she be allowed to use that during the school day in order to get through it, because she may have to miss it if she wasn't?
I hate to disappoint you, but I don't think there's a yes-no answer to that question. Let's hypothesize that instead of marijuana, we're talking about this person making occasional use of OxyContin to get through the day. It is easy to imagine a person whose OxyContin use would not in any way impair their ability to work. It might, in fact, make it possible for them to work. I would hope their school district would not fire them just because they're using OxyContin in a way that doesn't impair their work. I would say the same principle would apply to medical marijuana use. But if their OxyContin use may impair their work, then they might well be either demoted or limited or fired. The same principle would apply to medical marijuana.
Well, I guess I would disagree with you that the use of any of those substances would not necessarily impair them. I think it obviously would impair them. It may allow them to get through the day, but it's definitely impairing them.
Well, I would say there are people for whom pain medication that might make you or I unable to do a good job, but for someone with severe pain might bring their pain under control but not make them essentially intoxicated.
Well, yeah, I know what you're saying. It
Yeah.
alleviates the pain, but I don't think they're any more capable than you or I would be to operate heavy equipment or a car or machinery or anything else. So I think in that regards, it's certainly going to impair them. It may alleviate their pain.
What I'm saying is, and I assume you have spent as little time in medical school as I have, but what I am saying is that I believe there are patients for whom pain medication enables them to work but does not impair their ability to work. That's a narrow clinical class. I guess it is possible that that class in fact is empty. I don't believe so. But again, if a person's use of antihistamines makes them unable to do their job, then an employer has a right to take some kind of action.
So theoretically, we could potentially have teachers, doctors, maybe airline pilots that are using this substance or using marijuana on the job. Is that...
Well, it sounds like you're interested in being able to go home and say, Dick Gottfried said airline pilots could be stoned.
No, I'm not saying that.
No. Okay, good.
No,
Neither am I.
I'm just asking, you know, is it possible that under this legislation we're kind of allowing that? Because the reason I say that is that on page 11, line 28, it talks about affirmative defense, even when you don't have a registration card. You know,
well, now you're changing the topic.
I am changing the subject a little bit, but I'm talking about affirmative defense for a person that might be using and saying, well, listen, I need this to get through the day.
Okay. Well, first of all, that's not what that subdivision says. What that subdivision says is that if you have all the requirements of the medical marijuana law except a registration card, and you are prosecuted criminally, you can raise the defense that you are in fact a patient who has been certified by your doctor, et cetera, et cetera. A really cumbersome proposition.
It doesn't say that.
And it only, all it is aimed at is a person who meets all the tests of the law except having a registration card.
Only it doesn't say that.
Well, actually it does.
It says affirmative defense, a patient and a patient's caregiver who have failed to obtain, not doesn't have, that talks about maybe it's not in your possession. This says failed to obtain a registry identification card may assert an affirmative defense to any prosecution under state law for actions and conduct that is otherwise consistent with the certified medical use of marijuana. It does not talk about not having it. It says not obtaining it. It means you never got it, right?
I will plead guilty to being perhaps for responding casually rather than in the literal words of the bill. If you want me to limit my answer to quoting words of the statute, yes, that is what the bill says. If you have failed to obtain a registry card, but you do everything else in accordance with the statute, then you would be able to assert that as a defense in a criminal prosecution. And I think that's pretty much what I just said, although perhaps in more words. And I apologize if my effort to use fewer words threw you off.
It doesn't even say that. It says that you've got an affirmative defense to any prosecution under state law for actions and conduct that is otherwise consistent. So it doesn't talk about you've met all the other requirements.
Well, that's what otherwise consistent means. Because if you're possessing marijuana without having the condition, without having a doctor who is treating you, without having that doctor having written a certification, then your possession is not consistent with this article. And if you possess 2.6 ounces, then your possession is not consistent with this article. But if you are not a designated caregiver and you are possessing, then it is not consistent with this article. What element of this article do you think those words leave out?
How did they come to possess the marijuana?
they would have to,
Have broken the law.
they would probably have to have possessed it not consistent with this article, because a dispensary couldn't dispense it to them without the card. So it may well be that the subdivision you're concerned about, when you get finished applying it, leads nowhere. And I guess I'd have to, maybe that's true, that subdivision doesn't do anything.
Mr. McLaughlin, your time is up.
Thank you.
That's
It
certainly
does
not a
assert an
reason
affirmative
for
defense.
someone with